dias. Good morning. Welcome to, if not the first the first wave of events at the New Orleans Poetry Festival. This is a panel on the poetics of archive poetics. It'll cover a mix of engagements with bureaucratic archives of family as well. And I won't introduce folks with all the things that they have accomplished in this material world, but I'll just name them in the order in which they'll present, and then we'll get going since we're on something of a tight schedule. Thank you all for coming. At the far end of the table we have poet, multimedia artist Carolina Abade. Next is Julie Carr, scholar, poet, organizer extraordinaire. Susan Briante, also a poet and organizer. Jen Scapitone, scholar, poet, translator. I'm Jeffrey Pettibridge. Mostly a poet and curator. And Carolina.
This mic needs to be, I don't know to turn it on. But,
Pass?
Yeah, it's on.
It's on.
thank you.
There we go.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see some friendly faces. Well, today I want to show you some of the work that I have been doing from my family's archive. I think of the family archive as being so important, but it is so often undervalued. The items from the family archive that I am looking at are VHS cassettes and photographs and documents such as birth certificates, death certificates, and then lots of photographs from my father's youth in Jaffa, before the Nakba, and then his life inside Birzeit, where the family was forced to go. Today I'm going to show you a video. And Sean, can you press the first slide? I'm going to show you some slides from a little experiment that I made with my father. I asked him to pose in front of a wall where I was able to work a very old projector from the 1970s that was still in the closet. And of course these old photographs that I asked him to wear white. Can you go to the previous slide, Sean? Yeah, I'm wondering if you could dim the lights or these lights. Okay, that's fine. So you see there a superimposition. My father in the center, he has his eyes closed. And the projection of, I think, a family trip to Florida. I spent a lot of time annotating photos with my father. in the trip that I made right after my mother died. He was married for 51 years to my mother, who came from Cuba. And what was interesting about it is that we took photographs from this bin, and I asked him to give me some details of the photo. And we wrote not only dates and names as best he could remember, but also some detail about it. I was thinking then of how the past, the present, and the future could coexist. I don't know who is going to inherit these photos, but at some point, we all go into the great flux. And so these photos might have a life beyond. And I think for the Palestinian imagination, that is very much alive, this future tense of a return. And in this photograph, and the subsequent 3 that you will see, I decided to try to represent something that was very different in my own poetic mind and in my relationship to my father, which in this book, Hide, I think he's very much present here. But my father would narrate, oh, thank you. He would, he had this kind of psycho-cinematic, psychogeographic way of talking about his youth. So his youth was always superimposed onto my youth every day. So I am going to read, and we can speak a little bit later. I was in Chicago in February, and I made my father stand against the white wall while I projected onto him old family pictures from New Jersey, Baghdad, Florida. Can you go to the next slide? That's the house where I grew up, on 67th Street. You can see me in a white dress if you focus in on his arm. Me ves con mi abuela. Adorno insists one must cultivate a sense of displacement in the world so as not to be at home in one's home. I had to tell Baba to say cheese as the roof bisected his mouth. And you can go to the next slide. I won't read the ekphrastic poem associated with this one, but I like that the I of my younger self is right at his throat. The next slide. Always take an auscultation of a bad photo. My mother is the partial one in yellow terry cloth, and though her head is cut off, I hear the voice in her chest. His chest voice, a peacock. Because this is only a dream, I hear her laughter coming from the exposed tree roots. I hear it coming out of the child in the top left corner, running in the grassy tufts. I hear the gold jingle of Catholic pendants. I hear her hand brushing my pixie hair. Her voice in the gesture between me and the bird. Hello, hello, don't come near me. In the interest of time, I will hand it over to Julie. Thank you, Sean.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? All right. I just want to say what a privilege it is to be here with all of you. so many that I love so much, and it just is such an honor to get to be a writer with other writers now and always. And I especially am really so moved and touched to be with these people, these four people who I love very much and from whom I've learned so much. And so I wrote this little piece for all of you, and maybe especially for you. So it's called Archive Apotropaic, the archive of turning away, apo, away, against, or off, and tropaic, of turning. I wrote a book called Turning that takes its cue from the Hebrew word teshuvah. Teshuvah is an ongoing practice within Judaism. It's heightened and made communal during the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. During this period and at all times, Jews are instructed to look within and acknowledge our own shortcomings and the shortcomings of the community or even of the entire people. The word teshuvah means to turn or return, though it's usually translated as atonement. But why should turning lead to at oneness, to the resolution or completion that this word implies? In this book, turning is instead a kind of dizzying unsettlement in the impossibility of resolution. I wrote this book and the books that come before and after in a trilogy called Overflow in the context of wars, past, present, and future. That is, into an archive that is deeply unsettled and unsettling, an archive of debasement, an archive that debases itself. This underground overhead archive, like a retro-futuristic thunderclap, threatens to deafen its listener in awakening her, mutating the ear upon arrival. Or like the ineffable duende of the mother's odor, forever installed in the nostril rim, the archive's darkness will not let us go, a kind of chloroformic smelling salt, threatening sleep in the day, insomnia at night. This is an archive of forests, the red cedar and cypress, poplar and ash, the golden birch, the russet-armed oak. Forests scarred by mass graves or pits, out of which teenagers crawl naked from under hundreds of corpses that minutes ago were their relatives and friends. This is an archive of mothers burying themselves underground with their infants in their arms, only to emerge from that grave shelter suddenly blinded and holding a corpse. This archive hides a family for 2 years in a hayloft. The body heat of this hidden family melts the snow right off the barn roof, and thus they are detected. The living ones emerge from under this roof of melted snow, having forgotten how to walk and forgotten how to speak. The apotropaic archive holds a man eating the arm off a corpse, then shot in the head for doing so. I could go on, of course, and on and on. Where and when are these scenes taking place? From the top of Finland to the bottom of Greece, from the Atlantic shores of France to the Caspian Sea, over a period of, depending on how you locate origins, at least 10 years. But these scenes and those like them expand beyond this seemingly endless expanse of space-time, both forward and back. Ukraine, 1932, Cambodia, 1975, Rwanda, 1994, Gaza, 2024. An archive of debasement, an archive that debases itself. Why recall this or any such archive when recollection threatens to breed resentment? Resentment, to feel again, to feel in turn, a kind of centripetal spin that draws inward toward collapse like a black hole. Resentment and its close cousin, pride, shame, which Eve Sedgwick taught us are two sides of the same reddened face. The shame of having been abandoned, the pride of having survived such abandonment. For if in the archive of the destruction of European Jewry, we have forged a collective pride, this is an ashamed and shameful pride. That is because the abasement of the perpetrator is our abasement too. It always was. Not only because these stories and traumas have been spun around to become the justification for inflicting some of these very same horrors on the families of some of our very best friends, of our beloveds, but also because the human abasement found in a Ukrainian village in 1942, the village from which my family comes, when villagers roped 3 living women to a dead one and threw them, a bundle, into the river. They did this over and over to save bullets, was always the defilement, the abasement of the community of humankind to which we all belong. This is why I'm turning there now. The ordeal of the world, as Mbembe puts it, demands accountability and repair without end. In the act of turning, I found a powerful and radical longing for justice, for love, for accountability, without which peace is not possible. Instead of this black hole of resentment then, instead of training my ear on this strained voice of shame pride, I am listening in this archive for a quasi-voice, a queasy voice, perhaps a queer voice, emerging from out of the public tomb, a voice in common that might echo in the elastic space between words. These echoes across decades, across centuries and nations are themselves a kind of sonic turn, a turning toward that is a turning away to turn toward you again. An effort to find you in my dizziness, you in the book, in the life, my neighbor, my teacher, my sister, my brother, my spouse, my son, my daughter, my friend. Thank you.
Switch seats, just maybe just so I can see. Does this line work now?
Yes.
Oh, it does.
We're musical chairing, but it also feels nice to take a second to digest both of those beautiful and harrowing presentations. I'll try to make sure the mic stays with me. I'm going to talk a little bit about the archives that I'm thinking about in Tucson. Thank you guys all for coming. It's so nice to see so many friends I haven't seen in so long here. We can start with the first slide, or the second slide. In 2017, I sat at the back of a courtroom in the U.S. District Court, Arizona District, trying to trace my relation to the men who stood before the judge, shackled at the wrists, waists, and ankles, observing what was included and what was elided from the court record. I was witness to Operation Streamline, a process opponents called assembly line justice, because through the proceeding, as many as 70 immigrant defendants were offered a plea deal and sentenced en masse to the crime of illegal entry. Today, Operation Streamline appears as a last awkward gesture towards justice, an endless moment when masked state agents kidnap people off our streets, incarcerate, and often deport them with no legal proceedings or recourse, hurling huge swaths of our community into terror. Slide 2. I cite as an example the 50-plus Venezuelan families to whom a Tucson humanitarian aid organization delivers groceries once every 2 weeks. I joined them last weekend to hand heavy paper bags to women in their apartment doorways who swatted and cooed at kids pulling at their house dresses or the dogs scurrying around their porch steps, thanking us or shooing us away before we drew attention. The grocery deliveries are a necessity for those among the 700,000 Venezuelans who lived legally in the US under temporary protected status until Trump revoked their work permits and canceled the 2-year humanitarian parole program. In which archive do we record their testimony? When I ask a volunteer coordinator how many children are there in these families so I can donate some art supplies, she says she keeps the details general to keep them safe. Before we head out to bring the groceries, 2 to 3 in a car,
She records our emergency contact numbers on a piece of paper in case of an ICE confrontation. 2. I'm telling you about the conditions near the US-Mexico border because the US-Mexico border has swollen like a black eye, a purpled bruise. Because the border is everywhere, in the threshold of an apartment doorway where a woman takes a brown bag of groceries from me, in the apartment complex parking lot where a driver stays in the car to watch for ICE while we deliver groceries. Slide. In the reading response to my field studies in writing class, in which a student writes, I am not going to respond to the assignment. On Friday, my grandfather was arrested. We were not given the chance to speak to him. As I type, he's being held in a jail cell, waiting for ICE to deport him, and there's nothing my family can do about it. Into what archive has the student's complaint been logged? Next. Our class webpage exists on the Brightspace platform, included in the portfolio of Thomas Bravo Company, quote, a premier software-focused private equity firm with over 183 billion in assets under management, specializing in scaling enterprise software security and fine tech companies. In what informational web do my students' sentences hang, ready to be stitched to his identity, waiting to be slung as if from a slingshot? A state of fence and floodlight, compendiums of hyperlink and click. 3. Slide. Since 2020, I've been working as part of the Detained Project, a collaboration between university faculty and migrant advocates who record, transcribe, translate, and upload to a public-facing website the oral histories of formerly detained migrants and asylum seekers. Their stories reflect changing apprehension tactics, immigration policies, and detention conditions. For example, Afshin reflects on fleeing Iran in 2019 under political persecution. He traveled for more than 2 years through 11 countries before arriving in the US. He recalls the discrimination he experiences when he pled asylum and then again in detention. He remarks, referring to immigration enforcement officials, they know we are not dangerous. They know we are not criminals. We're just migrants and refugees. Why, in the United States, in a country who loves to talk about human rights, do they treat us like this? I think this system is horrible. Afshin talks to us from the United States. Others like Connie, a Canadian who spent months in immigration detention, talks to us from elsewhere after deportation. She also describes racial and ethnic discrimination, moldy food, a lack of medical or mental health services. Slide. We had scabies go through. We had chickenpox go through. Their answer is literally just more water and lock the facility down. So now you're no longer even outside where there may be fresh air, and your meals are all coming in sack lunches. Both were released during the first Trump administration. When asked about conditions in detention centers today, an immigration rights activist explains, we see what they do on the streets. Can you imagine what happens behind closed doors? Behind closed doors in rural Mississippi, in the desert of Arizona, in the Florida Everglades, beyond the borders of our country. In the detained archive, we don't use real names. We don't name places. The state erases humanity, and we erase names and addresses to protect people from the state. 4. And when I type the query, when does a migrant receive an alien number after being taken into ICE custody? What records are kept in that Faraday bag, in that black box narrative formed by an archive of my online activity? How can I read that archive that Palantir gathers about me, my algorithmic subjectivity? Our data is carceral. Our archive is stored in the cloud, as out of sight as the detention center, 9 miles off the interstate in the Barrens between Phoenix and Tucson. until we animate an archive. While the master's tools will never dismantle the master's home, we might surveil the surveillance. Next. The Tucson Migra Map is a collaborative project co-created by community members who document and report enforcement incidents. We document, we record the oral histories, we rapid response, we mutual aid, we counter, we create the counter archive that attempts to shake the contents out of the black box of borderland surveillance, expose the state's criminality. Slide. In motion, our laminates, our licenses, our photocopied birth certificates blur. Slide. Under the frayed blanket of law, our documents become undiscernible, illegible to the algorithm of terror. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really a privilege to be here with these people that are some of my touchstones in working with archives and trying to dodge the sentences that they seem to set out for us, some of which seem to be even programmed into our bodies. The following is entirely unscripted as a performative way of trying to write myself out of archives that I fell into by way of my mother's cancer diagnosis and the illnesses of many people on my block across the street from a toxic landfill and a copper rod mill. And I'm going to be talking about this closet musical that I'm writing, and it's somehow been 10 years that I've been writing it and showing images from the archives that I have unearthed. Archives that are electric but also made of dust. And I'm first showing this image that I found in Tucson at the University of Arizona's Bisbee Deportation Archives. This comes from an incident wherein the revolutionary socialist group, the Wobblies, or the Industrial Workers of the World, had staged a work stoppage at the copper mines at Bisbee to protest entry into World War I on the grounds that as workers they would not be in service to the copper magnates so as to kill their brothers in other countries, the workers across the seas. I found this image among other images of striking miners resisting arrest, of some very well-dressed ladies with long skirts looking askance at a flapper type of woman wearing all white and walking into the deportation, and wondered what the story is of this woman. It just goes to show me that after 10 years, I've done so much work to unearth the stories that form the underbelly of quantum computing, of artificial intelligence, and these data centers that are going to be part of the forthcoming economic miracle. And I still haven't understood anything about whole classes or genders of people and their involvement in these stories. Next slide. So for me, archival poetics always comes back to Antonio Gramsci's point that the starting point of critical elaboration is knowing thyself as a product of the historical process that has deposited in you an infinity of traces without the aid of an inventory. We must set out to make such an inventory. Next slide. This is an image that I found in my family archives. It's of me competing during a sports event that would happen every year, Field Day, during the year in which the site that can be seen across the fence line here was declared a Superfund site. So we are being encouraged to work really hard to breathe really heavily the off-gassing of a toxic waste dump and adjoining lagoons and dumps of a copper rod mill whose water tower can be seen as a sort of icon to the defunct industry across the street from my house. Next slide. This icon of defunct industry was taken down right around the time that I began writing my book, The Republic of Exit 43, thereby sanitizing the view for the neighborhood while also erasing any traces of the pollution of the neighborhood that is recognized as a cancer cluster. Next slide. I found myself represented in EPA archives. I found my elementary school, I found my school block, and didn't know what to do about it. Next slide. I found my block involved in the history of the building of the Twin Towers that across the street were milled the wires, the wiring that went into the World Trade Center. Next slide. I found that there were smokestacks on the place of my home that I grew up in just a decade or two before we moved there in search of some kind of affordable housing on the Gold Coast of education on Long Island, New York. Next slide. I found myself in new wire ads for the Zero Wire Company, trying to understand the innovations in cabling and wiring. New slide. I found myself in these tables of industrial sludge analyses. New slide. I found myself in Zero Wire's recounting of history and the cataclysm that was the democratic election of Salvador Allende, because he was set on nationalizing the mines of Chile, thereby making it harder for United Statesian extractors to simply plunder the land of Chile. Next slide. I found myself in maps of the extraction trajectory of Zero Wire, which moved into the Andes from my Long Island home and into St. Louis as well. Next slide. I found myself in the signatures of people that we know through their libraries and their museums, like Henry Clay Frick, like Phoebe Hearst. Next slide. I found myself in images in which the company felt great about sending indigenous kids to college while they looked over a smelting site from a safe distance that doesn't show how it was listed as one of the 10 most polluted sites on Earth a couple of decades later. Next slide. I found myself in works of activism by Peruvians, like this woman, the Última Reina de la Villa Minera y Ciudad Real de Minas. Next slide. I found myself in images of unnamed miners from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, many of whom were immigrants. Next slide. I found myself in negatives of miners who were staged to be photographed in front of a dictum reading, "The greatest safety device in the world is a careful worker." This found on the US-Mexico border at El Paso. Next slide. I found myself in images of a miner resisting arrest during a strike. Next slide. I found myself in this image of a woman mysteriously in white. Is she going to her loved one who's about to be seized and extra legally deported from the United States for the crime of having resisted working toward the Great War? Next slide. I found myself in this banner. It's a protest banner reading "Dawn with War," thereby showing that it is very likely written by someone who is not a native speaker of English. And this protest banner was stripped from the Chicago Wobbly headquarters during a trial against those who extra legally deported them. Next slide. I found myself in these workers' cards, these employment records, which show all the different immigrant groups that were employed to work in mines. Effectively, once a certain group would get sick of working in the mines, then they would have to go to a different ethnic group because there was too much intel among the miners about the poor conditions. Next slide. I found myself in this employment record in which union tendencies are marked as blank, but socialist tendencies are marked as being present for this man, Frank Andreozzi, who is described as a hard scrabble. Next slide. I found myself in calls for a general strike. Next slide. I found myself in the new general and mining telegraph code, which was used to encrypt messages among management and also to economize them. Next slide. I found myself in this code, which encodes the phrase, for instance, "the mine has been opened up well," with the code word "lament." Next slide. Or the phrase, "we have a good deal of difficulty with the natives," with the code word "investment." Next slide. I found myself in these decoded telegrams. Next slide. I found myself in the song "Pennies from Heaven." Every time it rains pennies from heaven. Don't you know each cloud contains pennies from heaven, which I detoured to make the poem. Next slide. Next slide. Every time it rains, profited whitenessing, which decoded means proposed wiring. Don't you know each cloud contains choke damp chain cable, which means curtail the output, cover all emergencies. And in the interest of time, I'll stop there.
I have no slides. As you have been already able to hear, some of the issues that emerge when one engages in archives have to do around temporality as well as subject position. The story I would tell about the history of documentary poetics is about a history that's a little over 100 years old and also significantly implicates literary genre. So I think of documentary poetics as emerging out of a creative devolution and of epic poetry, particularly modernist epic, and that creative devolution also would entail a kind of ethical pivot precisely around the axis of anti-Semitism. So folks like Muriel Rukeyser, Charles Reznikov needed a way to move forward with some of the poetic commitments that they learned from Ezra Pound, but also a way to refuse Pound's anti-Semitism. The book that I'm talking about in a certain way, or the ways in which my engagement with archive has emerged, is a book about the global war on terrorism. So really the archive from the early 21st century during the Bush II administration, specifically around the what gets called the torture memos. Legal justification for the torture of men, mostly in the global war on terrorism, and then the counter archives initiated by journalists, artists, scholars, and researchers. It became pretty clear pretty soon in the history of America that there would be no political or judicial reckoning for the authors and agents of the torture memos and the people who did the torturing. Right? So there would be nobody going to jail for the torturing that happened, nor would there even be a political reckoning. What might a political reckoning look like? Something like the Truth and Reconciliation Committees undertaken during South Africa's post-apartheid political reformation, or the post-genocide Truth and Reconciliation that happens in Rwanda. Right? We do not exist in a functional democracy, and therefore no political reckoning would be possible. Right? Obama's famous "we need to look forward," right? Reckoning as an activity is inherently retrospective, and so the political bromide of needing to look forward meant that no reckoning would be possible. Right? So my work as an artist began with the problem: since there will be no political reckoning or judicial reckoning, can forms of art serve as an alternative, albeit lesser form of accountability, right? So how to make of the forms of poetry and history a form of accountability, a form of reckoning. What is a really a terror archive of different order and kind than we have heard accounted now, but nonetheless. My engagement with that archive took many forms. Today I'll talk about one, both in terms of sort of method and intent. Many of y'all will remember that there was a prison in Saddam Hussein's Iraq called Abu Ghraib. That then when the US invaded that country and took it over, they used that prison for their own carceral purposes. And many of y'all will recall that eventually emerged out of that prison a documentary layer of photographs that the torturers and the prison guards were taking themselves as souvenirs, right? Which is to say that, like, the carceral environment will almost always turn everybody into a lyncher, where they will make a spectacle of their sadism. Is that a digression? I don't know. So then, because the army is the contemporary army is something of a functional institution, they set one of their generals, General Tuguba, to produce a report on how the abuses at Abu Ghraib happened. In that 15,000 word report, the word pain never appears. The word torture appears only once in the phrase, here you go, simulated torture. Meaning the very famous picture of a man standing on a cardboard box with electrodes attached to his fingers. of course, he was told he was going to be electrocuted. So what to do faced with this, document meant to be a document of accountability, but is really a document exonerating. Right? A detourning is called for. In this particular document, I use the practice of erasure, right? So taking the state's technique of redaction and applying it to itself, redacting everything but the couple of vowels A and I when they appear together, because the articulation of them, AI, is a specific lament out of Greek tragedy. A lament out of Greek tragedy that the late, great RIP classicist Nicole LaRue argues has an anti-political edge. When she says anti-political edge, she means it calls the entire question of the polity into order. Because in that lament cry of I, it's rubbing up against AE, the Greek word for always, which is part of civic oration and is used at the start of civic speeches, meaning the ongoingness, the perpetual ongoingness of the city-state and of the empire. So in that lament cry out of tragedy, we get the grading up against the word, the state's word for its ongoingness. It's also a cluster of vowels in English that the word pain has, as well as maintain, as well as detain, as well as Abu Ghraib, and in the transliteration of many of the Iraqi men's names out of Arabic into English. So I think of this as a catastrophic engagement with the archive, an overturning of the archive, and I will stop now. And thank you for your attention and your listening, and we can then open it up to conversation. So, preguntas clase. Raise your hand, and we will hear from you. We can see. Maybe, yeah, house lights. He's fooling with us. Yes, Nick.
Thank you so much for all that. It's really beautiful. I was just thinking about the different, with archival poetics and documentary poetics, especially when it's familial or it's your own histories and proximity to the archive you're using, like how do you think about the idea of inheritance? Because sometimes we choose to inherit, other times we do not choose, and how do you think about just that process, that activity? Great.
Yeah, certainly there's a burden to keep the archive, to preserve the story. I find ways of animating the archive with art and with video, which is a great engagement with it, and how to keep it, how to move it forward.
So I think in the inheritance of the Holocaust, we have a problem. And the problem is we've been told since infancy, never forget, right? Never again. To repeat again and again and again the stories. And I think that has created a kind of stuckness among diasporic Jews, and I won't really speak for Israeli Jews because I can't, honestly. But I think we can certainly see something of that, of the problem of never forgetting. So I'm thinking a lot about this problem because the answer to that problem isn't to forget. The answer to that problem isn't to push it away or pretend it never happened or diminish its importance in world history. But it can't also only be to re-articulate trauma again and again and again as if somehow that makes you innocent, because it does not. It also doesn't make you free. So yeah, so I guess I won't speak so much more because we really don't have a lot of time, but I just will say that like I've been talking like through a podcast through lots and lots and lots of people who've been questioning exactly this problem and coming up with really interesting, complex answer questions. So I think maybe it's opening up for all of us the sort of problem of this sort of oversimplified idea of holding our inheritance kind of within us. Right?
I think we're at time, so that'll be our.
Sorry.
But we're all going to be here throughout the festival, and I can tell you all that these people are good in one-on-one conversations and correspondence subsequent to this. So one more round of applause for our. And for our hosts at the New Orleans Poetry Festival, and particularly Sean on tech.